I'm Iris Ruth Pastor, a contributor to Let My People Know, and I'm here today with Hans Sternberg, who is the author of the book, We Were Merchants. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Before we share with our listeners what exactly we're going to be focusing on today, Hans, I'd like to read an excerpt from your book. It was the place where dreams came true. Gracious, personalized, and superior customer service was the norm. It was the place to buy the highest quality merchandise, backed up by the handiwork and passions of 5 generations of merchants. It was a place where clerks greeted you by name and gave your kid a nickel to buy a Coke. So I want to know, Hans, would you mind telling us what I was just describing and how you are connected to that description?
The family had started its first retail store in 1739, well before the American Revolution. We were still operating that store when the Nazis forced us to leave Germany in the late 1930s. The kind of business we ran there was high service, individualized, decent fashion, and was successful for the time we had the stores. When we came to Baton Rouge, my father decided to leave Germany in the 1930s, actually 1933, when one of our stores, my mother's family had a store, my father's family had a store. When my maternal grandfather's store was picketed by the Nazis, that and the passing of the first Nuremberg laws, which prohibited Jewish children from attending public schools, those two events convinced my parents that it was time to leave Germany. That happened at the very end of 1935. My father left. He left my mother with the 3 children with my grandfather, and she continued there. He came here, one, to learn English. He could say yes and no, nothing else, and also to find a place to earn a living. That took a year. Then she joined him in, at that time, Baton Rouge.
Your business was to become a landmark in Baton Rouge. It was Gottschalk's and then later merged with Maison Blanche. Is that correct?
We bought Maison Blanche in 1983, yes.
But prior to that, how did your father decide to settle in Baton Rouge?
Well, when he got to the United States, he went to cities where he had relatives, and because he felt he needed help finding the right business. So he went to North Carolina, he went to Jackson, Mississippi, he went to Philadelphia, and finally to New Orleans, where the famous Sternberg clothing company of New Orleans was situated. They were obviously in the manufacturing business. They knew the retailers that were for sale. They knew my father wanted to buy a retail store, and he had managed to get some money out of Germany. And they gave him a choice of 2 stores, one in New Orleans, one in Baton Rouge, both relatively small. He decided on Baton Rouge because he had limited capital and thought his money would go further in a smaller community.
So you talk a lot about the character and the ambiance of the department store. Could you just tell us a little bit of how that reflected the times? Because the times today, certainly, you walk into Walmart and Target and IKEA, you certainly don't get the level of service that you gave, nor the quality of merchandise. And could you just, for people that weren't even alive during the 1950s and 1960s, could you kind of just tell us what a department store experience would be like?
When you walked into a upper moderate store in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, you would walk into an era where all the salespeople were on commission. They earned most of their pay by the amount they were able to sell. If you go into Walmart, they're there primarily to keep the stock straight and the shelves filled. Wasn't the case here in our stores, nor in the stores of most uh, retailers, including Macy's. Some people were on straight commission, which meant every nickel they earned had to be because they sold something. But then the store had its own guidelines. Everything, if the customer wasn't happy, we took it back. I can remember one story about a man who came in and wanted a refund on an Izod shirt. And of course we said, sure, just bring the shirt in. He said, you don't understand. I took it to Far East. It didn't fit. I wasn't going to drag it all over the Far East. I gave it away, but I want my money back. And he got his money back. True story.
So the customer was always right. Is that
Customer was always right.
Okay. What do you think are some of the highlights when you look back at that era? I know, like, choreographed display cases and windows and things like that. What are some of the things that you could tell us about that era that we're really not familiar with today, that are almost lost to history?
Oh, gee. Um, Gosh, that's a hard one to say. I don't think there's anything that hasn't been tried today, but at that point, the stores were geared to expanding very rapidly. I think the thing that happened at that time was we got hit in the 1980s. We got hit with a late 1980s. We got hit with a major recession called Saddam Hussein's bear market. And as you remember, Desert Storm evolved because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and the first President Bush invaded Saddam Hussein's Kuwait and drove him out. That froze the public markets to everyone, and Macy's went bankrupt. Zales Jewelers went bankrupt. Burdines, Florida, went bankrupt. It was a lot of upheaval in the retailing and financial community. So I think that was one of the biggest things that happened. I know no one ever sees that again.
Could you tell me a little bit about what it was like to be a Jewish family in Baton Rouge during the time of segregation and desegregation, and how that impacted your business and kind of your lifestyle?
Segregation and the end of segregation, thank you, glad it happened, took a lot. And there was violence that accompanied the end of segregation. The stores were picketed. There were people killed. In Baton Rouge, in one instance, 5 black Muslims were killed by the police. A white television reporter is to this day, and we're talking about the late 60s, he was paralyzed from the waist down in an act of violence during that time. He's still paralyzed and still living here in Baton Rouge. We had a bomb thrown through one of our show windows. We don't know whether it was by the White Citizens Council or the KKK. We were being threatened by both.
Did it have anything to do with the fact that you were Jewish?
Nothing. They were threatening everybody and picketing everybody. No, not in the least. I think the only incident, there was one time when there was a swastika painted on the side of the temple. And to my knowledge, that's the only anti-Semitic act that I personally experienced during my life here in Baton Rouge. And I came when I was 1 year old, and I'm a little older than that now.
Just a tad. Hans, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm going to hold up the book. I don't know if we can get a good glance at it, but it's We Were Merchants, and it's the story of the Gottschall Maison Blanche department store chain. I'm Iris Pastor, a contributor to Let My People Know, which is an outreach and engagement initiative.